Okay, guys, what's going to happen is that, of course, whoever preached on Sunday leads the follow-up on the next Wednesday. Ben preached on Sunday, okay? And what he wants to do this evening is a little bit different. It's related to what he did, but not a direct expansion of the things that he did. By and large, we're going to talk about the trials of Jesus leading up to the crucifixion. There were a bundle of them, although it's kind of a stretch to call them all trials. He had a number of appearances in front of a number of different people, and just to kind of give you an idea of how that all went down, trying to sort that out. And then after we deal with that for a little bit, we're going to deal with very, very famous, if you look up the 7 sayings of Jesus on the cross, there's 7 words or 7 phrases that are recorded as Jesus speaking on the cross, from the cross. And they're pretty significant. They're really big. Ben on Sunday dealt with one of them, the "it is finished." Okay? There's 6 more. And we're just going to walk very, very quickly through those 6 statements of Jesus and kind of what they indicated. Okay? Good enough?
Yeah, that's great. I have a voice. I just don't know how long it's going to last. And so we'll go through. I'm not in a lot of pain, but I'm starting to be in some pain. So that's fun. All right. Also, I have this thing where I can't talk quietly because I don't have a voice in that space. So I have to project so that I have anything. So that's a bonus. All right. So
I can talk quietly.
Yeah. Thank you, Doc. I appreciate that. I was feeling pretty good till I sat outside for 3 hours last night at a baseball game, and it has set me back. All right. As Doc said, we're gonna deal with numbers today, all right? And so we're gonna look at 5 or 6 trials. That's gonna be part of the conversation here. And then we're gonna look at 7 things that Jesus says. We're gonna start with these trials. Here's what I love about Wednesday nights like this, okay? It would be really hard to talk about these on a Sunday morning in a way to be able to lay out what all happened and the order in which it happened and how they're related to each other and the things that were happening. It'd be really hard to kind of go through all that kind of stuff in a sermon context, because oftentimes in a sermon, we're trying to give you a big idea. There's supposed to be something kind of motivational about it. There's supposed to be something kind of transformative about it. The stuff that we're doing tonight, for me, is interesting, not transformative or motivational. Does that make sense? And so this is just kind of teaching, knowledge kind of stuff. As far as I'm concerned, unless you really kind of go through and just kind of lay out how it works and how it happens, I think that you're gonna hear this stuff tonight and you're gonna say, oh, okay, that makes sense. Now I understand why this was like. For me, it's revealing of some of the pieces that you've heard bits and pieces of different stories at different times, but you don't always understand exactly how it worked out and how it flowed in an order, how they're related to each other. I would compare it to like the birth narratives around Jesus. We have 4 gospels, we have 4 different writers who are writing about an event that took place, and then we come along and we try to harmonize them, okay? We try to take all the different ideas and make them work together and flow in a manner that makes sense. We do that with the birth stories, which is not necessarily 4 gospels, it's a couple, but even more so with the death story of Jesus, his crucifixion. Everyone writes on that. All 4 actually get super detailed into it. I love that. I can remember this all the way back into college, being taught on the Gospels, Life of Christ, and they talked about how the different gospel writers kind of wrote in different ways, and the one that's always stood out to me was Mark. And the way that the professor, introduced this was Mark is kind of like ADD, and so like you read his gospel and he's like all over the place and just like chasing squirrels the whole time, and there's no rhyme or reason to the stories that he tells. They don't make any sense until he gets to the last week of Jesus' life, and then he becomes super focused and locks in, and he tells everything just very meticulously and carefully. John doesn't get that same description, but he's a lot the same. John, almost half of John's book is the last week of Jesus' life. He gets super detailed into the last week and the things that are building up. Nonetheless, all 4 of them write about what happens within the last 24 hours of Jesus' life before he's crucified. And because of that, we've got these different perspectives, different stories. We're going to work to try to harmonize them and pull them together so that you can see them in a chronological order that's going to make sense and flow. And then I think it gives you a broader understanding of the larger story of what's taking place. Does that make sense? So it's just going to be kind of some teaching type stuff, just working through some of these big ideas. And we're going to start with this.
Before you get there,
Okay.
one of the things that Ben was referring to, the reason that they slow down, this is huge, okay? One guy called the Gospels passion stories with extended introductions. In other words, the heart of all of the Gospels is the last week of Jesus' life. The heart of the Gospels is really the last couple of days. It's basically the death and resurrection. It starts slowing down with the last week, Passion Week. And then it really, really slows down when it gets to the last couple of days. But that's because that is the critical event. Everything else in the gospel is setting up who it is and why it is he's going to the cross and how he's going to come out of it. All of the rest of it is just setting this up. Tells us, John tells us by the time you get there, this is the Son of God going through this. And the other gospels are going to tell you, by this time, Jesus is revealed finally that he is the Messiah. No one expected the Messiah to die, but they make the case, this is Messiah. And this is what happens to the Messiah, and it's totally unexpected, okay? And so you expect it. It's a rapid pace, slows a lot down once you hit the last week, and goes to a crawl over the last couple of days. Because that's the heart of the story. That's what this whole thing is about. Okay?
And that fits the New Testament pattern of the sermons that they were preaching, which was basically, he died, you killed, God sent his son, you killed him, you better do something about that, right? Like you need to figure out how you're going to respond now that you know that you killed him, because God raised him from the dead, because you're not going to win this battle, right? And so like that's the message of the New Testament. Of what's being preached when you go town to town. That's the message of what's happening. And so the Gospels, which are, again, written much, much later, they're not live tweets of what's happening in Jesus' life. It's written much later. They're looking back and they're telling some of those extra stories of Jesus, but they're really honing in on that most important piece that the entire church is built off of, which is this last week. It's why we make such a big deal about this last week, which would be a good time to plug. Tomorrow we're starting our walkthrough. If you guys want to catch a sneak peek, you could cheat through and walk and see some of the rooms tonight if you want. But we've got all down, just if you walk out here and go to your left towards the preschool rooms, all through there and around our track, we have 7 different rooms that are set up as stations of the last week of Jesus' life. And so starting on Sunday in the triumphal entry, and then wrapping all around until Saturday as he's still in the tomb. And so we've got that again, Thursday, Friday, from 3 to 8 o'clock. That's you come in and kind of go at your own, you won't go at your own pace, but you'll go room to room as it's scheduled and played out. Whenever you're available, whenever you can be here, we'll be starting new groups every 10 minutes and walking through. So encourage you guys to come and see all of that, kind of we're hoping it'll be an immersive experience to kind of step into that space and experience it firsthand. So let's jump into it. We're going to start with this, 5 or 6 trials. I'm going to explain to you why there's disagreement on that number here in just a moment. We're going to start on number 1, though. First trial that we talk about is an arrest at the very beginning, and so here's a statement I made Sunday morning. He went through trials. None of them are legitimate. Okay, they're all a sham. And so to call some of these trials as more legitimate than others, none of them are truly legitimate. All right, they're all kind of shady. But right off the bat, this is one that it's hard to even call this a trial. All right. He gets brought before a guy named Annas. Annas used to be the high priest. He's not the high priest anymore, but he still seems to have some clout and some weight. And so they take him to Annas in the middle of the night. This is probably still what we would call nighttime, not necessarily even morning yet. Once he's arrested, my understanding, this is the first place that he goes. He doesn't go to a jail cell or anything else like that for a bit. It's straight to Annas' house because, as you read in John, soldiers arrest him, they bound him, they take him to Annas. He's father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest. That's the name that we're going to get to here in just a moment, because that's where he's going to go next. Send him to Caiaphas, the high priest. During this time, this conversation, again, this is not really a trial. This is going kind of before the elders to get their okay. Yeah, let's proceed with what we're doing here. Kind of getting his stamp of approval. He's a big influential guy, and he does that. But it's worth noting that there's not any formal charges that are being recorded, and really this is just kind of a precursor to getting him to people who have the authority to do some stuff. Does that make sense? Okay, so it starts with this guy named Annas. It's also worth noting, one of the statements I made in the sermon was that Jesus experienced several beatings in this process leading up to him actually ended up on a cross. I want to highlight something on each of these stations where it's applicable. In Annas's presence is where he has some guy punch him. And we're told it's an official, probably like a temple guard, temple official kind of person. Someone doesn't like the way that Jesus is talking to Annas. Annas asks questions, Jesus gives him his responses. Somebody thinks he's a little snarky about it, and so they pop him and say, you don't talk to him that way. And that's now our first evidence of Jesus being beaten in this whole process.
Yeah, you've probably can think of instances where there is a power behind the power, and you know that he's even more powerful than the guy who holds the title. That's probably the kind of guy that Annas was. You know, the fact is, he used to be the high priest. I think he still held the power. If he didn't approve of what was going on, it wasn't going to happen, okay? He had to put his stamp on it before anything else was going on. And I suspect he'd already figured out what was going to happen, but he had to have that first audience, because I think he's probably, among the Jewish leaders, probably more powerful than Caiaphas, even though he didn't hold the chair at that time.
Any thoughts or questions on that? Very quick, not a whole lot to it.
Just one thought, I know, just to put it in perspective, I know modern days, this would be like preliminary questioning. If people were like Dateline, these put you in a room and just start asking you a bunch of questions. I think that's kind of where this type of process is. It's very beginning. You're assessing.
Sure, it could be that if it were legitimate. That's the one piece in all this. This is happening in the middle of the night at my best understanding is some dude's house, right? I think they go. Did it say that? It just says they take it to him. But I don't know. I read that almost like they knock on his door in the middle of the night to wake him up and like, hey, here he is. We've got him. We need you to ask him a couple questions. He asks him a couple questions. He says, yeah, let's kill this guy. And they take him out to Caiaphas. That's essentially how it feels to me. It does not feel like a booking and a process and or hey, would you mind coming in for an interview? It doesn't feel like that. It's certainly not.
They
that.
got to do two things at this point. Number one is that they have to justify killing Jesus, right? So you're going to have to come up with charges that the Jews will understand this is what they're doing. What is going to justify what they're about to do? And then the next phase of this thing is going to be, okay, whatever's going to justify killing Jesus to Jews will not justify killing Jesus to the Romans. And they want the Romans to kill him. And so they have to think about how they're going to justify it to themselves and to the Jews, and then they have to figure out how they're going to justify it to Pilate, to the Roman authorities, so that they'll kill him for him. And there's going to be different cases that are going to be made, but they have to clarify both of those things. I think Annas is part of that process.
All right, second part of this is, and this is where it gets a little bit muddy. Some people will say that Jesus goes through 6 trials. I personally would land on, I think it's more of 5, but this is where it gets muddy. This second and third one is what we're calling this one, is Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. And so it's a little bit murky to figure out whether or not Jesus gets an audience with just Caiaphas and then he's brought before the Sanhedrin, or whether or not he's in front of all of them all at the same time. Caiaphas is the high priest. He's the one who has the authority to kind of do some of this stuff. And so it's possible that he has, kind of a court, a hearing just with him. It's not real clear. You can see some of the scripture references of where we're pulling some of this kind of stuff, okay? Where's my notes? So as Doc was saying, they're pulled in. Sanhedrin is kind of a ruling religious leaders, I guess. It's kind of a political position, not necessarily a
Kind of a
religious
Supreme
position.
Court and Senate all rolled up into one.
Yeah. Which is weird to me to think. I don't know why that exists, but that's probably because of my church background, nonetheless. So they've got that kind of set up. He's brought into them. They're, again, looking for something to convict him. They're looking for something that they can put their stamp on and say, he's guilty, so we have the right to get rid of him. That's kind of what they're looking for. They have, and this is the scene where they bring in some witnesses. If you've read the stories closely, maybe you've heard the stories of they're trying to find some witnesses, someone who can give a testimony. They kind of have a hard time. They finally get some people, and they don't really do a good job. Their testimonies don't necessarily line up. They're not really offering the stick it that they're looking for that's going to hurt Jesus. But they don't let that slow them down. They just blow right by it. Eventually you come to this question in Matthew 26 in his account where Caiaphas says what he says, and he says, what do you think? And the Sanhedrin says he's worthy of death. And so they decide that's what's going to happen, okay? So basically, again, they'd ask him about his claim to be the Messiah. Jesus answers questions. One of the fascinating things in this is you look through these trials. There's a couple times when Jesus says nothing. But anytime Jesus does say something, he doesn't necessarily answer questions, but he doesn't do anything to discourage their assumptions. He doesn't necessarily give them what they're looking for, but he doesn't necessarily challenge them either. Okay? And again, all of this is because, in many ways, he's coordinating this. He's going on a purpose. These are the games they have to play. If Jesus wants the end result that he wants, then he has to kind of play along too. And so he doesn't lie in any of these situations. He doesn't create any extra conflict, but he also doesn't speak in a way that's going to make them back off. Is that fair? Is that a good way of saying it?
A couple other things, just as you think about it, it's these guys, they struggle to find witnesses that agree, and that sounds a little bit weird to a lot of people. But think of the fact that Judas had agreed to betray him just 2 days before this, right? They didn't know exactly when the arrest was going to take place, and so they're scrabbling. They're trying to get this death done before the Passover, okay? They want to make sure that he's dead and buried before the Passover. They didn't have a lot of time. And if you're going to get a bunch of guys on the stand that are going to agree with each other, it's going to take a little time to get your stories straight, get your stories together. I don't think they had a lot of time. These guys are scrambling, trying to find evidence against Jesus. So they come up with a variety of things. And as Ben said, Jesus really didn't defend himself. He just kept on prodding them. He said things about the temple, and you can't do that. It's blasphemous. He's calling himself something like God, and that's absolutely blasphemous. And so you'll notice that the charges that they discussed were all religious charges that brought about the sense of blasphemy, which was a killing offense. Now, it would not have been a killing offense to the Romans, but they had to justify it, first of all, to themselves and to the people that Jesus needed to die. And if they could say that he was against the temple, if they would say that he is uttering blasphemies, then they had the right to execute him. And I think that's kind of why they're pressing this way. It shouldn't surprise you that they scrambled, because this was very rapid. Didn't have a lot of prep time.
And again, this all speaks to one of the big points we're going to draw out of this at the end, is just the nature of this is so against even their own standards. I wonder if part of the reason they couldn't get credible witnesses is because this is happening in the middle of the night.
You can't have a capital trial in the middle of the night.
There's lots of people who've been saying things about Jesus that would have fit what they wanted them to say, but it's hard to find them at 1 a.m. I think it's partly just a practical issue. Where can we get these people? Can we get them awake? Can we get them here right now? Well, they went and grabbed them, but then when they showed up at Anna's house, they were already gone. So now they're trying to find where they're at. And I think it's just a practical issue of getting people everywhere that they need to be, because they're rushing through this as quickly as they possibly can.
One thing that's interesting is when I was down at Emory, I was teaching a class with a Jewish rabbi. And we were talking about this trial scene. And I think I mentioned, I don't remember exactly, but one of us mentioned, I think, that it violated all of the Jewish laws for how to conduct a capital trial. I mean, if you go down and look at it, for a capital trial, you got to be at this time, this place, these kind of witnesses, this kind of stuff. And it violates all those rules. And some people have said it couldn't have happened because it violated their rules. This rabbi, Blumenthal, laughed. He said, of course it could. These guys wanted him dead. They're not going to let rules stop him. Okay, now he's a Jewish rabbi. But he's saying back in that day, if they wanted someone dead, who cares about the rules? Get it done. And he said, that's what you've got. You've got a mob scene taking place in this. You've got guys who are wanting Jesus dead so badly, they're going to take every shortcut they can get to get it done. And he says that's what you're looking at in this particular. And coming from a Jewish rabbi, I just found that fascinating.
But I think that's really cool of him to be able to have that self-awareness. I think, doesn't that fit human nature? Can you think of any group of people who, when they're dead set on something happening, that they're going to make sure that they follow every rule just in case? I mean, this is what a lot of trial law is you're trying to find the ways that the police didn't follow all the right steps and orders, and you're trying to find any technicality to let them get off the hook. So within this meeting, again, we've got this scene. Whether it happens in two separate ones or not is hard to understand, but the conclusion is clear. They call him out. He's worthy of death. They find him guilty of blasphemy, again, speaking false things about God. They don't have the authority to execute under Roman rule. That's what Doc was saying just a moment ago. So this is not an executable offense by Roman law, and so they're going to have to partner with them. They have to find a way to get a partnership with someone with Roman authority to make this work. So they're going to refer him off to Pilate. Now, there's something that happens in this scene as well. The beating that takes place. When you've read the stories, or if you're familiar with the story around these trials, there's a scene where Jesus at one point spit at. There's a time when he's blindfolded, and people start punching him, and then they say, "Prophesy, tell us who hit you." Okay, this is where that scene happens. And so now, of these two trials, I'm going to call them two trials. This second one, he's beaten the first. He's physically attacked in the first one. He's now physically attacked in the second one as well. And at least degraded in the context of being spit on, that kind of thing. So again, that's how this is all playing out. He's referred to Pilate. Pilate is the governor of the area, and so he was a Roman citizen. He had some political power a little bit. He'd been placed in this region to govern over it and to keep the peace. That's his job. If there's things happening in your area where peace is not existing, you're failing your job. That's number one. A big deal that he's got to pay attention to. And so within all this, now they want to partner with him. We're probably getting into early morning hours now at this point when it gets to Pilate. Let's see. So they present Jesus to Pilate. This is where Pilate will accuse him of claiming to be the king of the Jews. If you remember reading that at some point. There's two different conversations with Pilate, and so it can easily come into one. So this is where he accuses him of being king of the Jews. Jesus, in this interaction with him, largely remains silent. He doesn't say much, if anything at all. He doesn't make a claim to any sort of political kingship that we see in the John passage that's up here. But he's also not dissuading either. He's not arguing against it. Pilate isn't really sure what's going on in this scene. It's kind of unclear, and so he doesn't really think he has a responsibility in this. He releases Jesus, not releases him, but decides instead that he's going to send him off to a different guy named Herod. Luke records that piece of this. The Matthew passage is where it's going to say that he wanted to release him, but he had so much pressure from the Jewish crowd that he felt like he couldn't. That may be conflating the second time that he's with Pilate. It's hard to tell. But the Luke passage is where he records these pieces, okay? So basically Pilate gets in this spot where he's like, I don't think this guy deserves to die. I don't really want to be a part of this. Hey, Herod's in town. I'm going to send him to Herod and let Herod handle this. This is where it gets real confusing to me, and I may need your help on this as well. Herod is another governor in the area of a different sense, all right? And so Herod is Jewish, but he's like traitor Jewish, I guess would be one way of saying it. What's the term for people who became Greek, living in Greek culture? Hellenized. He was kind of a Hellenized Jewish person, okay? He had become very comfortable with the Roman culture, and because of that, he had a lot of benefit to his life, all right? He was a wealthy guy. He had a position of authority and governing. The Jews, in my understanding, it's more of like a puppet position. He has a title as being, to some extent, he was the king of the Jews in a sense, all right? He has a role, he has a position, but he doesn't really have any authority. He's just kind of a figurehead that the Romans could use to placate the people because they want peace.
Well,
Their whole job is just to keep peace.
Imagine if you're trying to oversee a bunch of conquered territories. You don't go in and just put all Romans as the officials. You allow the locals to still have their officials, but the officials have to kowtow to the Romans. Does that make sense? That's kind of what Herod was. He was a Jew, and so they had their own leader, but he was not independent. He had to behave underneath the Romans. It was just he didn't have any power in that respect.
But he had all the blessings of power. He was wealthy, had the position.
He was living it up.
Life was pretty good for him. And he's in town because it's the Passover. He's making an appearance in town. And that's convenient for Pilate, so he sends him over to him. Nothing physical, no sort of abuse or beatings or anything happened in that scene. He's sent to Herod. Luke's the one who records that as well, that whole section. There's not a whole lot to it because Jesus shows up. Herod's only interested in Jesus because he's heard stories about him, and he wants to see some entertainment. That's basically it.
There's one other piece to it. It's one of the reasons that he sent him to Herod is because Judea at that time was divided up into a couple of different tetrarchies, basically different territories under different Jewish guys. Jesus is from Galilee. This Herod was the ruler of Galilee. And so Pilate, trying to get out of this, the responsibility for this, let me take the ruler of his area and see what he has to say about it. So he sent him off to Herod because he was the guy basically down in Jerusalem, which is not under his control, but he is the place from where Jesus is based.
And it seems like Jesus says nothing. The whole time he's with Herod. Herod sees this as, I think, to like the medieval times, and you've got the king, and he wants the court jester to come in and just entertain him. I think he kind of treats Jesus that way. Jesus doesn't play along. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't do anything. He's a complete disappointment. Herod has to find entertainment in something. And so in this scene, you don't necessarily see the physical beating, but you do see him go after him, at least emotionally, which is significant depending on who you are, I suppose. But this says, then Herod and his soldiers ridicule, they mock him, and then this is where they dress him up, all right? So you've read stories of him being dressed as if he was the king. You now have the guy who is the king who is dressing him up as if Jesus is the king, mocking and playing off of all of that. So
the best picture of Herod I have ever seen is in Jesus Christ Superstar. And they picture him as a buffoon, just mocking Jesus. And that's the feel of the story. It really is. I think that they were accurate in capturing the sense, even though they made a mockery of it. I think the whole thing was a sham.
And it is. And they're just passing Jesus off back and forth, trying to figure out how to make all this work. So Herod doesn't have anything to do with him. They mock him. They ridicule him. They put a nice, pretty robe on him, and then they send him back to Pilate. This is where I think you see more conversation between the two of them, especially in the John passage. You see more of the back and forth. Jesus actually engages some with Pilate. I'm sorry. There's a feel to me, and you, Doc, you can correct me on this too if you like. There's a feel to me that Pilate's almost curious. I could be just reading in optimistically. That's very possible. But I get this feeling as Pilate's asking questions to Jesus that there's some part of him that is kind of curious and interested in a genuine way.
Curious and cynical.
It doesn't make sense to him. It's so far out of his worldview that he can't rationalize what this is and make it make sense with what's happening and what he understands to be true.
That's fair, I think.
But there's a curiosity. And I don't feel like it's the same curiosity as Herod. Herod has this curiosity of, oh, you're a miracle worker. Why don't you do something for me? Why don't you show off? Why don't you impress us? I don't get that from Pilate. It's a more legitimate curiosity. But to some extent, I think that you could look at Pilate and say he doesn't have any context to make this peasant from Galilee into God. Like he can't comprehend it being that big. He doesn't understand why. I think because he can't see Jesus as even being in a position to even being considered for such a role, why the Jews are also upset that he's claiming to be that. Like it seems too easy to dismiss. I think all of it makes him very, very curious. There's also the story of his wife, right? Who has like a dream kind of in all of this at some point about Jesus. It's weird, it's strange. And so I think there's enough little pieces. For me, I feel somewhat sympathetic towards Pilate. I think he's put in a weird spot. And I think he's curious, but I don't think he has the context to make any of this make sense to him. And so this is, again, where you're going to see more of the conversation. Mark passage here, which is what I've got up on the screen, gives us some of the pieces that you're going to be more familiar with, where he basically tells the Jews, I don't see any reason to convict him of this. This doesn't make sense to me. He seems like an innocent guy. The Jews aren't going to accept that. They yell back, no, we want this to happen. He comes up with the plan of, oh, well, I know. We do this every year for the Passover. We release somebody to just kind of appease the people again, because it's all about making peace. And so we're gonna release somebody to make them happy, and I'll pick a horrible guy. I'll pick the guy that nobody wants to see out of prison, so that they'll let this guy go off because I don't think he's that bad. I really honestly think that this is what Pilate's thinking. Now, I could be reading into it, but it seems like Pilate is actually trying to do a solid for Jesus. He's trying to find a way out of having his blood on his hands, which is why they say, no, give us Jesus, or give us Barabbas, kill Jesus. And you have the thing where he goes and he literally washes his hands and he says, I don't want this man's blood on my hands. The whole scene is very, very strange and surreal, but he goes along. So in one sense, you can emphasize Pilate didn't think he was guilty, but you could also point out, but he's the one who signed the check. He's the one who had the authority to say, here you go, here's your permission to go kill him. It's very interesting.
It's weird to a lot of people that Pilate responded to the pressure from the Jews. He was the power guy in Palestine, and what he said went. And he started out ruthless with the Jews. He didn't care about them at all. And so he did some things early on in his career there that were extremely heavy-handed, that caused a whole lot of kickback from the Jews. He had done a bad job of governing already, and he was under the gun from Rome before this trial ever started. They knew that it was going to be difficult for him to maintain peace because of the way that he had behaved previously, okay? And so in this trial, he knows that if he gets another bad report, if the Jews simply don't cooperate and they rebel and kick up and send reports to Rome and all this kind of stuff about Pilate, not going after the guy who was a pretend king, they could get Pilate in trouble. And so it looks like Pilate succumbed to pressure because he was already under pressure from Rome. And so he gave in weakly because he was in a very weak spot by that time. Does that make sense? He wasn't at his strongest. He was at his weakest when this thing came down. And so he went ahead and let things happen that he kind of figured shouldn't go down. All right? Because he was thinking of himself and what it might cost him if he let it go down.
Essentially, the decision is one of self-preservation. He doesn't think that what's happening should happen, but because it's making people happy who he's not made happy in the past, it's probably going to be good for him. That is essentially kind of what it comes down to for him. Again, so here's the John passage. He tells them, I find no charge against him. It goes into the Barabbas stuff. And this is then when he releases Jesus to be whatever term you want to use for it. Scourged, flogged, whipped, all those kind of things. That's all the same word. It just means he's about to get beat, and he does. And that's where this whole process sets up before he is ultimately then crucified. So that's the process. I would call that the sixth trial. I would call it the fifth. but you see kind of the process of how he kind of bounced around everything else. All right, let's kind of hit some notes here to sum all of it up, okay? Within the whole system, from beginning to end, from the time he's arrested to the time that he's dead on the cross, it's the Jews who are focused on religion. They're trying to defend what they believe their God. They're trying to defend what they think is right in that sense. They're calling it blasphemy. They're partnering with the Romans, who essentially execute him for sedition or rebellion or rioting, that kind of language. He's trying to work against the authorities and leaders of Rome by instituting his own kingdom, is essentially what he's convicted of. That's going to lead to his death. If you look at the whole system, the nicest way we could say this is that all the proceedings were marked by irregularities. It's a very PC way of saying that this was shady business, all right? This was handshake deals, backwoods agreement kind of stuff to make all of this go down. If this story happened in eastern Kentucky in the hills, you would all be like, yeah, that's what happens out there. Yeah, so like this is kind of the way that this is working. These are people with power who are leveraging their power, people who have built credibility and authority, and today is the day that they're going to use it. They're going to leverage whatever position they have to get what it is that they want. Enough of them come together to make it happen together. Everything about it is shady. Even to call any of this as a trial is a little bit far-fetched. It's stretching the truth. All of it is very, very shady.
What's interesting is the way that Ben put it earlier. Even though this whole thing is shady, Jesus kept moving it along. He could have, I think, defended himself in a whole variety of ways. He refused. Okay? When it was a question that didn't really matter, he just kept his mouth shut. If it was starting in such a fashion that they might let him go, he kind of prods them on. Jesus is really the one choreographing what's taking all these things that are taking place. Okay, it was his design. It's why he came into Jerusalem in the first place. Jesus came into Jerusalem on the triumphal entry in order to pick a fight until they killed him. Okay, that was his whole intent. I'm going to pick a fight, I'm going to prod, and I'm going to prod, and I'm going to prod until they put me on a cross, because that's what I came for. Then I'm going to raise 3 days later, and I'm going to fix this whole thing. And so this is not a defeat. This is not a victory by these guys who are trying to put on this sham trial. It's time. Let's get it done. All right? He's choreographing what's going down.
Probably the way I see it too is that the absurdity of how this happened was just a reflection into the light that is how corrupt the whole system was. And Jesus knew that and used that corruption. I mean, the fact they have 200 to 1,000 soldiers, and the first place they go is to the religious leaders who are hand in hand with the political alliances. That was just the way it's going to roll.
Well, that's, again, we've talked about this together. We've talked about this in this room. The harshest things that Jesus ever said were to religious leaders. He had the biggest issues with people who thought they had the market cornered on knowing God and were holding that over everybody else. Really bothered him. Really, really bothered him. And so he had harsh words for those people because he accused them of misleading sheep, of not caring for what it is that God cares about. It was a big deal to him. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see all that. The whole scene of it all is just so very fascinating to me. And the way in which he does choreograph it. The one time that it seems like Jesus almost presses, even in these scenes, to pick a fight is with Pilate. And I wonder if that's because Pilate, I get this impression Pilate's almost sympathetic to him. And it's almost like Jesus has to say a couple things just to justify enough for Pilate to say, this doesn't make sense to me, but okay, I'll go along with it. Like he almost has to push him a little bit in all of this. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very fascinating thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a couple other things that I think we've got more. Go ahead, John, first.
This whole proceeding was more or less just to put the blame on the Romans. Because Herod killed John the Baptist not too much before this. The Romans did. After this, Stephen got him riled up enough that they took him out and stoned him.
And they weren't supposed to.
This was just to make Rome look like the bad guy.
Those are great points. We had that conversation today. If you go, again, that's a great point, especially in the context of these sham trials. I don't know if you guys could hear this, but he went to Acts, and he got into Stephen being stoned. He went in earlier in the Gospels with John the Baptist being beheaded. Those were times when Jews acted without Roman authority, which points back to this whole trial system.
It's a mob scene.
They were very comfortable with breaking the rules if they could get what they wanted. And there's other times that they didn't wait for Rome to work with them on this. They just took things into their own hands and made something happen. And I think that they looked for a partner in Rome in this to make this work. I think they knew they had the leverage on Pilate because of what had happened in the past. And it was easy for them. Again, the motivation for the Jews is the people followed Jesus. If we do this, they're going to turn on us. If we can get the Romans to kill him, then it wasn't us. Even though there was no part of this that made the common person look at this and say, our religious leaders didn't have a hand in this.
Let me say one more thing, just to make sure that if Ben finishes material, he'll go late. But there's something bigger going on that you just have to understand in this whole thing. The reason I like the old play, Jesus Christ Superstar, is they paint this whole thing as a farce. The whole thing is just a joke. Now, just think about it. Man putting God on trial. That's what's going on. Man putting God on trial. Now, you tell me how that's not a joke, how that's not a sham. And they're questioning God, trying to find his culpabilities in these things. It's ridiculous. It's stupid, right? In fact, later on, when Peter talked about it in Acts 2, he says, you guys killed the author of life. You killed the guy who created you. You killed the only guy that gives you physical life and can give you spiritual life. You killed him. That's stupid. You killed him. God raised him. Kind of puts you in a spot, doesn't it? That's an early sermon, you know, the way Peter put it, okay? And so just think about it. You know, this whole thing, it's crazy. But it's crazier than that. This is man putting God on trial, which we tend to do in a variety of ways all the time. Mm-hmm.
You said that the Jews were focused on defending their religion. And yes, but they were really focused on defending their power. And they were focused on defending their power.
Yeah.
They had over the Jewish people.
But to do that, they had to make it a religious case. Okay?
Jesus was getting enough followers that people were starting to question how they were leading things. And they were getting, I mean, it was really a self-preservation on their side too.
Yeah, that's psychoanalyzing them, which is legit. But they couldn't go out there and say, people are listening to them more than me. Okay? They had to prove that he is genuinely a dangerous man to themselves and to the Jews. People always try to justify themselves when they want to do something stupid. Okay? We do it all the time. You want to do something stupid, you're going to make a case for it. And that's exactly what they're doing. And they have to make a case that sounds better than it really is. And so you're right. You know, this guy was threatening their power. But on the other hand, they couldn't use that as their excuse. That wouldn't work.
Yep. One last thing that I find very interesting about this. These trials occur in a compressed time frame. Jesus is probably nailed to a cross by 9 a.m. That just blows my mind. All right? The whole process, by the time that he's arrested, I'm thinking it's close to midnight, the time that he's finally arrested. So when you look at all these different scenes and all these different people who are coming in and having these conversations, they're moving him quickly. I don't think there's a lot that the gospel writers are leaving out. I think that it's quick conversations, it's quick movements, it's quick setups. None of it is legitimate. It's all happening under the darkness of night. And by the time people are waking up on Friday morning and lights coming up, he's already being beaten, he's already bloody, he's already getting prepped to start carrying his cross up the hill.
If you're going to do something nefarious, don't take your time.
Couldn't stop it by the time anybody went.
Yeah. But by the time the crowds could respond, he's hanging in the air already. It's bad. And then he's dead by 3 p.m. He's on a cross. He's not on a cross as long as most people were. Now, thinking about being up there for 6 hours sounds horrible. It was not uncommon for them to be on there for over 24 hours. It's why the scene tells us that they came through to break his legs. Okay, so now, again, just some of the details of this. I mentioned that he dies from suffocation. The way that you would survive on the cross is you would use your feet, the nail that was through your feet into the wood. You would press down on that to lift your body up so you could inhale, and then let your body down as you exhale. Because you're just hanging, and it's creating so much tension and stress on the chest so that he can't breathe. And so that's what you're seeing for 6 hours, the work of that. People could do that for a time, especially if they hadn't been beaten too severely ahead of time. Jesus is beaten pretty significantly. But he's on the cross. He's fighting for air for 6 hours. What they would do to speed the process up is they come and they break the legs. If you break the legs, you can't push up anymore. You're going to suffocate pretty quick. And so that's, again, all these are pretty important details of when they come through. They're going to break his legs. The other guys, they break their legs. They get to Jesus. They don't have to break his legs. He's already dead.
One of the ways that they did, because the cross wasn't intended just to kill, it was to torture. It was to shame and torture. And so one of the ways that they would prolong it, because they wanted the people to stay alive on the cross for a long time. They wanted people to see them suffering, okay? So sometimes what they would do is put a little tiny seat, just a little something that they could rest their buttocks on, about that level. And if you could lean against that, you could go ahead and not have to pull yourself up or push yourself up so that you could breathe. You could lean against that, right? And sometimes what they would do, even though there are nails in the foot, is they might put a little tiny block right underneath your feet. So when you're pressing down on that, it's not just the nail, but you can actually use the bottom of your feet to help raise yourself up, because you had to raise yourself up to breathe. And so some crosses had a little tiny seat, some crosses had a little tiny footrest. None of that is mentioned on this cross, but the reason that people lasted so long is because they wanted them to survive for a while, right? In this particular case, they wanted them dead before the Passover, so they broke the legs to make sure that they died quickly. Otherwise, some of those guys might have gone on for a day or two. They could do that, right? And so, but they wanted these guys dead quickly because of the Passover that was coming. I think this whole thing is sped up because of the Passover coming.
And again, that fits really well with the Jews' plans to just rush this through and get it done before anybody can stop it. All of this is in their favor to make this happen.
Not only that, but it was according to Jesus' plan to be the new Passover lamb. At the time,
the imagery
they were
is
killing
thick.
the Passover lambs. Jesus was dying. The symbolism of that just blows your mind.
It was, that's again, we went into some of that. Gosh, my brain's a fog right now. I didn't get into all that this past week. That was 2 weeks ago when we got into some of that kind of stuff. Or no, did I do it this week?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, because I got into the curtain tear. I don't know.
You got into the curtain.
I'm sick. We'll go with that. All right. We've taken a long time to get through those 6 things. So here's 7 more things to get through, starting brand new. 7 statements on the cross that Jesus says. We've got 10 minutes to get through these. Let's see how much
You have
Doc
a
wants to
minute and a half each.
sabotage. Here we go. First one that he says on the cross being recorded is from Luke chapter 23. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. As he's looking out on the crowd, this is again pretty early on. He actually prays for forgiveness for those who are crucifying him, and it's kind of set in context specifically even of the Jewish leaders, the Roman soldiers as they're there. Even while his very literally enemies of his are killing him, he's thoughtful of them. He's got compassion and mercy despite his suffering. That's a massive sermon by itself, and we did in a minute.
This is the key part. They don't know what they're doing. They're very good at killing people. They're very good at crucifixion. Has nothing to do with that. It's just that they're clueless as to who he is and why he's there. Okay? They don't have any idea they're killing the author of life. They don't have any idea that my death is going to have this consequence for their sin. Okay? They're clueless about what's really taking place. All they see is a dead guy. They don't see the Son of God dying for their sins. I think that's what this is pointing to.
Okay. Number 2, same thing he says, truly I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise. This is, he's got the 2 thieves on the cross next to him, and he's having the conversations with them. One of them mocks him with the crowd. The other one steps in and kind of defends him and steps up for him and says, dude, you can clearly tell that he doesn't deserve to be up here like us. Kind of has his back. Brief conversation, and then Jesus makes this statement to him. I've got a rabbit trail to go down on that. Can we do this in 30 seconds?
The only thing I was going to say is paradise, it's not heaven. It's not the new earth. I won't tell you what it is. I'm just going to tell you it's not.
Cool. All right.
It's kind of where those who are going to be in the new earth are until it comes about. Okay? It's like heaven is Hawaii. You're waiting in San Diego to get there, and San Diego is cool. Okay, this is San Diego.
It's purgatory. You mentioned that on Sunday.
I did?
Purgatory, yeah.
No, it's not purgatory.
No, okay, all right. Not purgatory, okay. Quick rabbit trail. When it comes to issues of baptism, if you're in a faith tradition of the past that doesn't place as much of an emphasis on baptism as what our faith tradition does, this is a story that they will frequently go to say the necessity of baptism isn't what we make of it. They'll point to this and say, this person was able to be in paradise with Jesus without being baptized, so we shouldn't place as much of an emphasis on baptism. Whereas I would argue back on that, this is the exception to the rule, not the rule. And again, it's not even so much to say the word rule, as much as it is the pattern that you see in the New Testament is that people who come into a relationship with Jesus get baptized. Guys hanging on crosses are probably exempt from that. In fact, if we wanted to use him as a pattern, then it would mean that if you want to be saved, you have to be crucified. And that doesn't work either. And so just a quick snippet on that. When it comes to baptism, I had this conversation literally 2 days ago on the phone with a guy who gave me a call and said, hey, I have this situation. Could you help me think through this? And we came to this passage. And I'm like, look, that's not the pattern. There's exceptions to the pattern, but none of them are ever set up as being the pattern. They're outside of what the expectation is, and that's important to notice.
One of the things about that is that we don't get to decide whether someone is saved or baptized. Jesus does, and
Yeah.
he's the one who decided this.
Jesus having authority, that's a big piece of this. The flip side of all that as well, if you're going to be picky on our faith tradition on this, is being baptized doesn't mean you are going to paradise either. It's not a golden ticket either. You got to recognize and respect that too. Number 3, he's hanging on the cross and he looks down at the disciple whom he loved, which is very conveniently the guy who's writing this. And he says, woman, here's your son. So he speaks to Mary, his mother's there watching, and he tells her, John's your son now. He looks at John and says, John, this is your mother. So he kind of handles some responsibility of someone being taking care of his mother. We're told that he took her into his home from that point forward. All of this, by the way, is also weird to me because she had other sons. Kind of strange to me.
The only thing I
that
can
she's being
figure
passed off like this.
is it's not until after the resurrection that they came to believe in Jesus. Okay? And so at the moment this is stated, I don't think the siblings are not honoring Jesus. After the resurrection, they kind of do an immediate about face. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Maybe, I think, the most controversial of the statements that he makes, at least in my opinion. We're told that we're getting into the space of him dying. We're now in that probably last couple moments of his life. He says 4 different things. One of them is this statement, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? A lot of debate about what he means by that. It's a direct quote from Psalm 22, verse 1, that is viewed as a messianic prophecy. I don't know if it would have been viewed as a messianic prophecy before this moment. Him saying this is significant. It's going to pull that in. I think the safe way of looking at this passage, okay, the safe way of looking at this, in my opinion, is this is at least reminding us that God has a plan and that even in the midst of this, it's under control and it's going to work out despite what it looks like on the surface. I think that's a fair, simple, safe way to look at this.
Because it doesn't end with verse 1. If you read this, this is a righteous man who's suffering, and at the end of this psalm, he is praising his God who has never abandoned him.
Yeah, and if we can get there, which we got 3 minutes, maybe I'll show you where that one ends, because I think it matches up with the last thing Jesus says, with how Psalm 22 finishes. There's a couple other things, a couple other ways to look at this. Some people will point at this and talk about the separation that Jesus experiences with the Father. This is Doc and I are going to disagree on this small piece. I think it's a defensible position. I don't feel comfortable with it. I struggle with it and what it looks like. I struggle with the context. But they're gonna go to some stuff like this. 2 Corinthians 5. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. I believe that. They're going to take passages like this, which I have a couple more, but I'm going to skip past them because we got to go. But he gets into Jesus becoming the embodiment of sin almost makes him the enemy of God, is how some people, the extent that they'll take this. And so God turning his back on Jesus, even specifically a quote that I got today, just reading through this, a guy says, Jesus is forsaken, he's abandoned, he's left without God's resources or intervention to suffer and die alone. It just doesn't feel right, okay? Like I think it's defensible. That's where we would disagree a little bit. Doc, I think, hates this a little bit more than I do.
No, a lot more.
A lot more. I don't love it. It doesn't feel right to me, but I'm not as strong on it. Doc, what do you want to say on it?
I'm just saying, they talk about the fact that when he took on our sin, that God can't be in his presence. That's just stupid. I mean, the Holy Spirit's in you. Holy Spirit is God. Best I can tell, you sin still, right? The whole idea that somehow God can't be around sin, that would mean he can't be around us at any time. I just think that's ridiculous. And none of the verses that, like the one that we've shown, none of this verses says that God abandoned him.
They all point out, this is the next one, and I got one more here. They all point out just the atonement, the work, the sacrifice that Jesus did for us. They don't necessarily point out the abandonment.
But that somehow Jesus, that God and Jesus were separated, and so he had to go all through this thing alone. I just don't see it in the text. I don't see any scripture that supports that, and I don't see the logic that supports it. Since God, Jesus is God, and he's taken on sin, and the Holy Spirit's in you, and you sin, and and God is in our world, and our world is full of sin, and I just don't think it makes sense.
Yeah.
He's not going to let you ask a question because it's 6:29 or 7:20.
Do you think that, how he felt as if he were separated from God?
I don't think so.
At that moment, he couldn't feel God around him, like when we get in a pit of despair.
You've listened to too many preachers.
Jesus suffered the same way that we suffer, right? And there are times in our lives when we can't feel God. It doesn't mean God's not there.
Steve Brown would say, you might be right, but you're probably not.
This is where Doc will very definitively define himself as a professor, not a preacher, because preachers love to go to where you feel, and have you guys met Doc? That's not his space. That's not where he goes. All right. One cool thing, Acts 2. Yeah, we're at 7:30. I'm going to go over. If you've got kids or you need to go, that's cool. If you want to stick around, that's cool too. Acts 2, seeing what this gets into this cool part, that even if you get to the point that you can be okay with the idea of God turning his back, abandoning Jesus in this sense, as again some people believe, it certainly wasn't the case in the grave. It seems to be very, very temporary, very, very short temporary. He's there and available. We're going to move on quickly. Fifth thing he says, I'm thirsty. He asks for a drink. They give him some kind of like a sour wine, a wine vinegar thing. They dip a sponge in, put it on a stick, lift it up to him. He takes a drink. Right after that, he says...
But it was non-alcoholic.
Probably not.
That was humor.
Yeah, it probably was not high quality.
No.
It was probably homemade, but it would have had some fermentation going on in it. He gets a drink. He says it's finished. That's what we focused on this past week, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. And then right within that wasn't John 19:30. I messed up. I didn't fix that. That's Luke 23:46. I saw that, and that's what threw me off. So the last thing he says is recorded by Luke chapter 23, verse 46, where he says, into your hands I commit my spirit, which is also, by the way, a really strange thing to say to someone who's abandoned you. Just keep that in mind. And so he calls that out, final words, finishes up. This is the one that alludes back to Psalm 22. And to me, this is really, really kind of cool. So it starts with, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's a psalm written by David. He's being tortured. He's being You know, he's hurting, he's struggling, he's in a emotional pit in life where he's struggling. I should have put this on screen, but I didn't. Psalm 22 finishes with verse 31 that says, they will proclaim the righteousness to a people yet unborn. Okay, so I should have put more detail here. There was several verses at the end that just really celebrate, but it finishes with, they will proclaim righteousness to a people yet unborn, for he has done it. Those are the last words of Psalm 22, which I think are really, really cool. When you put this up with Jesus and it's finished, into your hands I commit my spirit, he has done it, Jesus has done it. He's locked in, he's finished in the same kind of way. Again, each of these things could be a sermon by themselves. We certainly did not give them the proper amount of treatment, but we're just flying through looking at them. A few things to hit just on all of these, just some ways to sum all this up. All of these are showing the humanity and the divinity of Jesus, okay? All of them are showing an aspect of his humanity in some places, like asking for a drink, when he's, the idea potentially of abandonment, that's a very emotional, human feeling kind of a thing. We get into divinity, we're talking about forgiveness. He's up there forgiving people. He's talking about salvation to people. He's talking about completion with people. So you see both natures really playing out significantly. Lots of these statements are connected to Old Testament prophecies. I didn't highlight that in all of them, but many of them are connecting back to things happening Old Testament, talking about the Messiah. Now again, stuff that maybe they didn't recognize were messianic until Jesus comes along and fulfills it. Now all of a sudden, things start popping off the pages, all right? But a lot of that stuff is being linked to both the idea of a suffering servant and also the victorious Savior. And what I think is really, really significant, and it's where we started tonight, all four Gospels really focus in on these scenes. They get more and more narrow as we come to the crucifixion. And in post-resurrection, they kind of broaden back out pretty quickly. But they get very narrow, very, very specific at the end, which I think is very significant. There wasn't anything in the church from the very beginning that was focused on anything bigger than the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Everything was built on that. Now, there's tons of teaching, lots of things that are very important that we can focus in on, things that we think are very, very significant to us being able to be followers of Jesus. But they are all deeply, deeply linked to what he accomplished for us on the cross and then what he proved through his resurrection. Anything else on that? I apologize for taking 4 minutes of your life. Yeah? We didn't have this sheet tonight. Thank you, though. I appreciate it.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. I'm sorry. Thanks, guys, for joining us. I'm going to pray for us real quick, and then we'll go. God, I thank you so much, again, for this opportunity to study tonight and just to celebrate what your son did, what you did through your son in saving us. God, we're grateful for what happened on Friday. God, we really look forward to Sunday and celebrating what it is that you did in a grave 3 days later. God, let that excitement build in us. Let us celebrate your goodness over the next few days and throughout the rest of our life. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.